Hi everyone, and thank you for watching as always. I apologize, I've been away for a number of weeks. I haven't been hiding from you guys. It's actually been a really busy and great couple of months where we've been working super hard on the book, Delivering the Digital Restaurant. It's going to be available in all good bookshops and of course on Amazon in around March or April of next year. We've been doing probably over 100 interviews, would you believe, with some of the leaders in, yes, the technology world, but certainly also restaurant chains, independent restaurateurs, and the entrepreneurs that are really trying to revolutionize this industry and try and help us navigate through the challenges of the pandemic environment, but also see the potential of the future. So today, what I'm sharing with you is actually a podcast that I was in last month. It was actually part of a conference called Localogy, and a really interesting conversation with a number of executives, some in the kind of startup space, the business development VP over at Yelp, as well as Jon Sewell, who is a tremendous entrepreneur out there in Iowa City, helping restaurants really survive the challenges of third-party delivery, but also see the opportunities through his kind of co-op system. So I think you'll find this a really interesting video. I'd love to hear from you, get your thoughts on what I've said and what the other panelists have said, and of course answer any of your questions. We here at Deliver the Dish are absolutely available and ready to help you with any questions that you have, whether you're setting up a ghost kitchen, whether you're a restaurateur that's trying to figure out this digital world that we're entering in and hopefully thriving in through the course of the pandemic, but more importantly, helping you find the right steps over the course of the next few months so that you really are building a platform for true prosperity in our industry. Anyway, enough from me, on to the panel, and look forward to hearing your comments and reading them below. Thanks for watching.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Localogy 2020. I'm Mike Boland, Senior Analyst with Localogy and your conference MC. So our next session is Eating Out meets Curbside Delivery, which will be a discussion about how the concept of getting a meal locally has completely transformed in the past 6 months. So is there a silver lining in forcing local businesses into digital transformation that vaults them forward several years? And that question and others will be tackled by our moderator Neil Polachek and a panel of heavy hitters in the local restaurants vertical. So let's get right into it. Neil, over to you.
All right, Mike, thanks very much. Back to it. This is our session on food delivery and the changes that are happening in the space. With me today are three well-versed people in the food space. Peter Curzon from Yelp, Carl Orsbourn from, what's the name
Deliver the Dish.
Deliver the Dish. And Jon Sewell, who we regrettably don't have a background for, is from
LOCO delivery
and Iowa City. So let me let in reverse order. Jon, why don't you give us 30 seconds, 15 seconds about yourself?
Sure. I'm a retired healthcare executive. I spent 30 years in healthcare. And I own a calzone restaurant in Iowa City and started a cooperative delivery service 3 years ago, which we're now franchising and making available nationwide.
Great. Carl Orsbourn.
Yeah, hi Neil, thanks for inviting me. My background is largely in convenience retail, but in recent years I was leading operations for one of the country's foremost ghost kitchen operations. And in the last year or so, I've been working on a book talking about the food delivery ecosystem and trying to support restaurants on their kind of journey to digital maturity.
Yeah. And Peter Curzon.
I'm Peter, and have been doing business development, product partnerships for Yelp for the last 9 years, working across a bunch of verticals, but food ordering being one of them.
And Peter, I don't know if he grew up in Kansas, but he lived in Kansas for a long time. So a couple Midwesterners here. Well, I was born in Ohio, so that makes three of us. Where are you born, Carl? Not in the Midwest, I'm guessing.
No, far, far away in a place called London.
So this session is all about what's happening in this food delivery space and sort of the changes that are affecting this space. Pre-COVID, it was all rolling along. There were some, people, DoorDash was buying and Grubhub, and there was all this consolidation going on. COVID-19 hits or the pandemic hits, whatever you want to call it, and there's a rush for delivery and pickup, and I think the world's changed pretty radically. So I'd like to first talk about there's this notion of the independent restaurant business as well as, and then there are what quick service or the franchise restaurants. Let's talk about the independent side for a little bit and what's going on in that space, and what you all are seeing from data or from what you're learning from where you sit about what's happening in the independent restaurant space as it relates to delivery and pickup right now, and where you see that going. And we'll start with Carl. How about that?
Yeah, it's a really scary time, I think, Neil, quite honestly. The forecasts right now are that the US will lose somewhere between 25 and 50% of restaurants in the next year. And it's obviously a kind of shocking indictment of what's been happening with regard to the pandemic. But the reality, I think, is that a lot of this change was already happening way before the pandemic. Dine-in volumes were shrinking, people's relationship with food was changing, and convenience was becoming more king. A lot of folks now, I think, are having that kind of mentality of what I want, when I want it, where I want it, and they're willing to pay for it. And I think
because of the phone
independence,
yeah,
because of the phone, because of technology, it's enabled a far more frictionless approach to address that need for convenience. But it's not perfect. And we're at an equivalent steps right now for restaurants, as I think MySpace was for social media. We're not at Facebook yet, but we're at a point where we're actually going to start to see this level of demand actually take us onto a completely new level. The reality is that restaurateurs have a big question to ask themselves, much like retailers did, independent retailers in the early 2000s. Are they going to move at the pace of change that is required? Because for me, we're at that point of inflection where retailers who went through that in those early 2000s, we're really being forced through it now through the pandemic. And I think the challenge that a lot of independents face, unlike the big chains, is that both capability and capacity is very difficult for them to address all this level of learning and knowledge to really succeed in a digital environment.
So you think big challenges ahead, must adopt technology much more quickly going forward, if not out of business. Peter, you guys must sit on a ton of data. What are you seeing around the independent restaurant space? Obviously, things have radically changed.
They have changed. And so since March 1st, we've seen about 26,000 restaurants close, unfortunately. And 60% of those closures have been permanent. And so as we rewind and we think about what's happened, we had scares in April on Yelp. Our consumer traffic dropped about 50% year over year for the restaurant vertical. And then it gradually got better as time went on, as we all sort of recall. Our traffic improved to still a 30% decline year over year, sort of proxy for consumer engagement more broadly. But then we saw that level off in July as reopenings rolled back and case counts increased. And so I think one of the most interesting sort of themes or trends that not enough people are talking about is the impact of summer and outdoor dining. Yeah. And so that's been with that safety valve or release valve of being able to eat outside, safely. And so as we all learned for the Game of Thrones fans out there, winter is coming. And so I think those businesses, sort of to Carl's point, that adopt technology and really embrace pickup and delivery in particular first, are going to fare much better and get through the long winter.
Jon, as a restaurant owner and operator and also in the delivery space, can these restaurants survive on pickup and delivery in the winter months? And how does a restaurant do that? What do the economics look like for a restaurant to be able to make it through, let's say, through this next winter season and then into the spring when we might be able to be out of this into a different normal, but not the old one and not what we have today?
Yeah. I think you're missing a very large segment of the industry that does the lion's share of their business in the fall and the winter. anybody in a university town, that's when they make money. And the summer are the slow months. So one of the big threats for me is I'm in University of Iowa. Big Ten canceled football. Football weekends are where we made the lion's share of our money that would help get us through winter break. And then, the spring semester would help us get through the summer, where our volumes would typically drop 50%. So I think the greatest threat to independent restaurants right now is the absolute lack of ability to forecast volumes. And restaurants run on such a tight margin and usually very little working capital that it's incredibly fragile for the independents, and I guess it is for the large brands too, because I see some of those closing their doors because of the debt issues that they took on. So one of the challenges for an independent restaurant is they don't have the economies of scale to get the technology they need. I mean, there's so many platforms out there right now. If you're an independent restaurateur and you're not tech savvy, how do you begin to dig through what the options are? And the real pressing threat to them is the commission rates that are involved in dealing with pickup and delivery, dealing with aggregators and marketplaces. If you don't do it, you're losing your deliveries to others. But if you do it, you're missing out on about 30% of the margin. And it used to be okay when 25% of your business was getting hit with a 30% commission. But now that's increased to 50, 60, 70% of the reimbursement coming into a restaurant.
So I've been reading, and I'm sure you all have been reading, that there's some caps being put on in some markets on some of these delivery models. And is that helping business restaurateurs survive in this period? And do we expect those to sort of go on longer than that? I mean, give me a sense of whether that the local entities that are putting those in place, that's working or not. You have any sense, Peter?
I'm not aware of. I've heard that just like the independent contractor law that was passed in California, no one's complying with it. And I'd heard that the third parties weren't complying with the caps in Chicago or Boston or Seattle, wherever they were in place. But I'd be interested from Carl and Peter. Are you aware of where those caps are actually being enforced?
Personally, I couldn't speak to compliance, but you're definitely seeing a growing momentum there. What we have seen in the data and speaking with restaurateurs is a definite trend in growth for pickup, where often the economics are much more attractive. Yeah. You don't have the complexity of dealing with the driver network. You don't have the customer support issues, where's my food, or dealing with the weather and things like that. And so take on Yelp, for example, we used to, pre-COVID, have for our online ordering through partnership with Grubhub about a 60-40 split of delivery versus pickup. And fast forward post-COVID or during COVID, we saw that really shift to 60-40 pickup. And so, I heard the other day the CEO of Sweetgreen speak and said really a dramatic rise for them too on the pickup side, and speaking with industry colleagues as well. So I don't think it's just a Yelp phenomenon. I think that there is a gradual shift to pickup where the economics are much more favorable and, hopefully help restaurants, make it to the other side.
So pickup is one of the ways, a quiver, let's say, for a restaurant to survive, is that they should really be encouraging pickup. I mean, maybe even doing some incentivizing their customers to do pickup instead of delivery, because even if they give a little more discount or do something that's financially a little better for the diner, it's still much better for the restaurateur. Are you seeing any of that, Carl? And Carl, you can answer that, or John at your stores?
Well, I think the reality is, Neil, is that we're finding that restaurants are having to adopt alternative revenue streams on top of their business model. And I think reality is that we're in a very different environment now to what perhaps will be in 6 to 12 months' time. But the after effects of the pandemic are going to live on. And I think for that reason, that's why delivery and takeout are not going to return back to the levels they were pre-pandemic. But we are now starting to see the need for restaurants to look beyond the profit margins of dining. Everything Jon just mentioned regarding the pressures of profit margins around delivery are absolutely real. But again, it's around the steps of maturity. The way I would characterize it when I speak to restaurants is that the platforms give them a voice, an ability to get exposure, but you can't rely upon them completely. The trick for restaurants is to be able to say to their clientele, to be able to take them from that platform and bring them through their own channels. If they can do that, then they're in a position to be able to forego some of those kind of fees.
Build a relationship.
And that's great for both delivery as well as it is for takeout, but it also, perhaps more pertinently, allows you to have a better connection to your consumer through the consumer data that you're collecting, through the loyalty platforms that you might utilize, and the ability to then help them recognize what you're doing as a restaurant to support them in the local community.
You know, it's fascinating, as you say, different lines of business. There are two restaurants that I frequent here where I live in the Bay Area. And one is a Japanese restaurant, great sushi place down the street. And I went to their website 3 months ago. We had sushi. Now I went back recently, and now they're a grocery store. They're a Japanese grocery store. Similar, another one in nearby. You know, they've adopted this, you know, more grocery-like kind of model, or an addition. Carl, is that working out for these restaurants?
I think it's a great testament to the entrepreneurship of restaurateurs. First of all, think about the supply chains, right? Going through the pandemic, the supply chain and the suppliers were struggling. So restaurants, by putting on, I guess, the term of a grocerant, if you like, were enabling them to help their supply chain still get product out the door. But again, it's also around just the fact that it allows you to keep your staff employed, or at least a portion of your staff employed. It's not necessarily a huge profit-making strategy, but it is something at least to keep that connection between your customer and the restaurant. And there's a level of trust I think customers have with restaurants. They believe in the quality of the food. They believe that restaurants probably practice better safe practices than retailers do. And in this environment right now, I think customers are looking to be able to make less trips out to get the food they're after. So if they can go out and have lunch on a patio and then get their groceries, or at least a good portion of their groceries, on the way out, what a fantastic option for them. So I think the concept of the restaurant being a retailer in a way will actually live on past the pandemic.
You do.
But I do think you're going to see restaurants, depending on the type of restaurant they are, explore additional means. So that could be meal kits. Yeah, have your dinner with us tonight, and then take a lunchbox home for tomorrow, right? So you actually have the kind of lunch kit. You've got others now looking at alcohol as a key add-on. And so I think convenience retail items is another, quite honestly. You know, convenience retail items. A lot of restaurants, when we had the issues with toilet rolls not being around for us all to purchase, a lot of them you'd order a food, and then you'd have a toilet roll delivered with your meal. So there are things like that which are creative, a little bit different, but I think restaurants really demonstrating some great entrepreneurial approaches to trying to survive.
So Jon, from an operator's perspective, how hard is it to sort of integrate those new lines of business into your system?
Well, actually, I haven't had to do that.
I know you haven't, but I'm asking you as an operator, what are the challenges there?
Well, obviously, different staffing models, different supplier chains that you've got to deal with, different health department codes, depending on whether you're trying to sell prepackaged or frozen. I mean, there's a lot of challenges to changing your remarketing, rebranding yourself. It's difficult. What I did was, I had about a 70% pickup and delivery business to begin with. We had the biggest delivery service in town. It became so difficult to keep our dining room open because of the ever-changing health department requirements, and the fact that you've got these self-imposed, deputized citizens who are taking pictures of your dining room if someone's not wearing a mask, or if it looks like you're not social distancing, and then you end up with a social media nightmare. So I just closed my dining room. I probably have no intention of opening it back up. And the last 4 months have been, the best sales volumes I've ever had in those months. So it's
what
like
you're
my whole model just changed.
Interesting what you're saying, John, because as this thing started out, the same sushi restaurant down the street, you couldn't get an order in unless you got your order in at 5 p.m. Literally, you weren't going to eat dinner till 8:30 at night.
Wow. And
so I wondered, as I was sitting there sort of experiencing this as a customer, wondering whether maybe this restaurateur will never go back to the in-place dining, because clearly his volumes were as full as he could do by like 5:20 online, and then he's spending all of his time fulfilling it. He doesn't have to worry about people getting up from a table and people waiting. Peter, we think any of that's going to happen, where these restaurants will just say, screw it, I'll just do delivery and pickup, and that'll be my model?
Very possible. I mean, certainly a portion of restaurants, it seems likely to go down that path. If I've learned anything in 2020, it's to avoid predicting the future, because I've gotten that one wrong too many times. But I think there are many restaurant owners who are going to be sort of rethinking their business and what they want their business to be in the future. And that could be pickup and delivery only.
Well, part of it's driven by a lot of people just don't want to go out anymore. They don't want to come to your dining room. So, in Iowa City, I can think of 2 restaurants who have decided to do the same thing I've done. And in fact, they've installed pass-through windows. So people just come, put your order in, come up to the window. They built their POS workstation there, and that's how they're doing transactions. And these are 2 iconic restaurants that used to have big dining room businesses.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think my take on it is that I think people will return to the dining rooms, Neil. I think there is a future for the occasion of dining out. But I've just completed a chapter on the book around the maturity of markets, where we've dug into India, China, and the UK. And in those environments, you typically have people that use dining out as an occasion, a birthday, an anniversary. Very different perhaps to the American culture. And in that environment, you're starting to see delivery play that role more on the kind of Monday to Friday or the lunch occasion. So I think there's a space for both of these environments going forwards. But I think what we'll find as a result of that 25 to 50% of restaurants shutting down, that the cream of the crop will rise, and they'll give a great hospitality and experience that everyone loves about dining out. But what we'll also find as a result of those that are left behind is the rise of what I was doing before this, which was the ghost kitchen. And I think you'll find that ghost kitchens will start to appear, which will allow restaurants to be able to get their offerings out to consumers in a much faster fashion than they ever have been able to do before, because now they're occupying the spots of those previously mentioned restaurants that have gone out of business.
So I've read about ghost kitchens and that whole trend, and I sit here and wonder, as a consumer, I think I have to change my way of thinking to be okay with the ghost kitchen model. Talk a little bit more about that, Carl, and what you think, why you think that's viable. Maybe it's my age that I just think it's heresy, but
yeah, well, it's an interesting one. You probably, the last time you ordered delivery, it could have come from a ghost kitchen. You wouldn't have known, Neil. Right, so that's the strange thing about this environment right now, and we're starting to see micro fulfillment, I guess is the correct term, both appear in retail as in with food. The reality is that when you have food delivered, there are 3 things that I think are most important: quality, speed, and accuracy. And if you can get your food to be prepared in a location that is closer to you as the consumer, then you're certainly going to be able to address the speed and probably the quality aspect as well. And so I think ghost kitchens have that ability to be able to do that because they're able to locate themselves in locations which, from a rental perspective, are cheaper than the standard location of where a restaurant will be located. And the beauty of them, of course, is that from a labor perspective, you don't have to employ any of the front of house staff. It's just the team cooking the food and then the drivers coming in to collect the food. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies in terms of the model that can actually work. The reality, though, is that they can't work in isolation. I think what you're going to start to see is not just ghost kitchens and primary brands operating out of them. You're going to start to see virtual brands start to appear on top of current offerings. And an example I'll give you is that in one of our restaurant clients in Chicago had their core offering, but they had 6 different brands out of a 400 square foot kitchen. 6. And that gives you an idea of what can actually be achieved. And that also is then appealing into another trend that we haven't talked about yet today. And that is people are becoming increasingly interested in having niches addressed, certain customized, personalized food, cauliflower pizza, certain types of dietary requirements that actually now can be managed through virtual brands in this kind of way. And so I think ghost kitchens are an enabler of things like that, virtual brands, as well as being able to cater for the various different taste trends that we're seeing in consumers.
Peter, you seeing any of these trends starting to pop up in some of your data, some of what you're seeing through, I mean, you guys have in some ways the biggest lens to this whole community.
Sure. I mean, the rise of the ghost kitchen, certainly, I agree with Carl, is great benefit to consumers and businesses alike. I mean, I think about our own business, or I'm sure many folks in the audience thinking about your businesses. Anybody wish you could focus more? And so being able to streamline just to a delivery and takeout operation, focus your time and attention, provide a great service, is going to show up in higher order volumes and customer satisfaction and revenue. And so there are many things to benefit from that. And so go ahead.
Well, is that a trend that a different demographic will, as the buyer, consumer, appreciate versus perhaps my demographic? I mean, I just can't wrap my head around it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be hugely successful.
Well, Neil, I got to ask, have you ever ordered pizza from Domino's? It's not really, a dine-in experience. They're one of the original pioneers of a really delivery first.
No, I have not.
Oh man, I thought I'd get you. Touche, point Neil. But so one of the things that we have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just to say that we have had to consider on our side is because many consumers do use Yelp to find a restaurant in person. We have to think about ways of communicating that a ghost kitchen or a virtual kitchen wouldn't be available for a consumer to actually dine in. So there are definitely like UI treatments and experience factors that we'd have to put together to make sure that we're communicating the right way to drive that right experience so that people aren't accidentally showing up and then disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Jon, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, counterpoint. I don't think you would find ghost kitchens to be well received by the independent restaurant culture. It's probably right there with the third-party delivery commissions as one of the largest threats to independent restaurants. And I was speaking on a webinar with over 100 people from the UAE, restaurant owners and government officials, UAE and India. And it's devastating, the independent cultures there. And we're not far from it here. And the biggest concern that I have, and one of the reasons I started the restaurant-owned delivery cooperatives, is that the aggregators are now starting to operationalize all of this data that they've been collecting of the independent restaurants. And they're using it to open, white label things in ghost kitchens. They've got all of the customer demographics in that market. They know who's been ordering whatever food source they want, what the popular items are. And they're also, I know a restaurant friend of mine who was approached by one of the top 2 national brands who is looking to create a virtual presence with their own brand in these communities being served out of virtual kitchens. It's a terrifying thing. It's commoditizing food, I think. Sorry, Carl and Peter. It's a cool concept from one perspective, but to drop, potentially 80 new food sources into a community is devastating in that community and into those restaurants.
Well, we're not going to figure it out all here in this session, but we have a few minutes left. What I want to do is go around the horn and have you each give us, and I know you don't like to do predictions, Peter, but like, what's this space look like in, let's call it 2 years? Rise of ghost kitchens, consolidation of delivery. Tell us what you see, looking forward, what this food to go delivery, dine-in space looks like 2 years from now, as sort of a closing thought. I'll start with you, Peter.
Sure. So I think we will have a permanent shift towards pickup and delivery. That's not going to replace the in-person experience. Certainly there are, humans are innately social. And so there's going to be lots of people who are comfortable and desire going back into restaurants. I think the grocery concept could stick around. I mean, I love just the entrepreneurship that small businesses are displaying. And I think that, that's going to continue. And so those businesses that are really paying attention to that customer demand and trying to delight their customer, and then they're thinking about long-term, are gonna, make it to the other side. And because they're doing the right things of providing a great product or service, they're thinking about distribution channels in a new way and rolling with the punches and showing that sort of growth mindset or flexibility that is going to be required.
Does one other sort of just tie that up? So you said 26,000 were shut, 60% will be permanently shut. That number will probably grow to 35,000, 60%. I mean, there's going to be a exiting of a bunch of restaurants. Does that mean that as we return to dining out more often, that those that stick around and survive this will be financially better off, do you think? I'm wondering if, and then, so you guys can answer that, and then we'll go to Carl, and then we'll finish with Jon.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the learning experience and operational improvements of surviving something like this pandemic will inure to that business for, hopefully many years thereafter.
Any predictions, Peter, before I move on from you, about the delivery space and the Grub Hubs versus the DoorDashes, and will DoorDash be a phenomenal success out there?
I think the big question, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, when we think about macro themes here, we all got to eat 3 times a day. The population is growing. So even if there are fewer restaurants, there's still going to be hungry people.
Yeah.
And so that means demand. And so entrepreneurs are going to try to solve that demand. And so whether it's through big aggregators who do have to get through this looming question that's playing out right now of employees versus independent contractors. I mean, that's going to be a pretty large shift depending on sort of where that shakes out. But like I said, none of that's going to change the underlying fundamental economics of supply and demand. A lot of hungry people eat 3 times a day. Don't know about you guys. I'm tired of cooking at home.
Yeah.
And so people are there's going to be demand for restaurants for, a very long time.
Carl, closing thoughts, predictions 2 years out?
Yeah, and just to build on what Peter was just saying, that a stat that always interests people, the US right now has the second most, only to Japan, restaurants per capita. And so way before the pandemic, we were in a hugely competitive environment. Even notwithstanding what Jon was mentioning earlier, it's already a very competitive business, made even more competitive right now. As I mentioned, I think the future is exciting, but also to use Jon's word, it's pretty terrifying. The level of change that we're expecting restaurateurs to go through is quite overwhelming. I think the word collaboration, not to use Jon's word of co-op, but the word of collaboration, which is in effect what he's trying to do over there in Iowa, is really, really important. And I think the technology platforms, the restaurants, the drivers, they all need to find a better way of working together to be able to give the end guest an experience. We've already got an early adoption of consumers right now working with us in the in the world of food delivery. But those folks that have perhaps tried it for the first time over the last few months, they're the ones that really are going to be needing to be convinced, I'd suggest. And that means better value and a better experience. And I think that will come, yes, through ghost kitchens. I think absolutely ghost kitchens are going to start to become around the country in a way that we perhaps would never have imagined back in January. But I think we'll also start to see a level of technology helping address the driver functionality. Perhaps not in 2 years, Neil, but automation is certainly coming in different ways in that regard. And I'll leave you with this. I ask everyone that I interview, and we've interviewed over 150 people for the book, what do you think is coming in the kind of year 2030? And beyond the things around automation, folks are very positive about the future, much like what Peter was just saying. But they say that more than anything is that personalization and customization are the themes that we should expect more of. Everything in terms of the food and the way in which restaurants communicate with their clientele. So I think that is going to mean everyone is going to have a better eating and dining experience going forwards, whether it be eating in or through delivery.
Final word, Jon, as we wrap up.
Yeah, well, my 2 years are, I'm very deeply engaged in trying to help communities around the country develop cooperatives like I've done. In Iowa City, we've got about a 50% market share. We've got almost all the independents. We charge half the commission rates, and there's actually money left over. We're probably running, we could break even by operating with a 7% commission. So the money doesn't need to be spent. I think in the next 2 years, there will be so many alternatives to Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats that I'm not sure I would feel that that was a good place to park my money from an investment standpoint. So I think you're going to see independent restaurants really pursue. I mean, they don't want to go out of business. They're going to have to find ways to reduce the cost structure. And by working as cooperatives, with 50 or 70 who are working together, they can develop their own, they have the scale to develop their own delivery systems, their own reservation systems, get into, their own payroll system. They become a collective. And I believe that is the best solution going forward for restaurants. But it's crazy. Who knows? All it takes is one, like if California's independent contractor rule sticks, that's devastating for the national third-party delivery systems. Or the caps. They're such a fragile industry now that it just shocks me to see, DoorDash is talking about going public now. Really? I mean, there's so many challenging things out in the environment. But all I can imagine is maybe, there's been some good financials during the pandemic that support, selling your stock. But it's an interesting time. I'll be happy to be out of food service before I do. My restaurant is driving me.
Well, what I would say is if you're ever in Iowa City, here's the shameless plug for you, Jon. Where do you want to get your to-go from?
Well, I would suggest DP Dough, calzones, but there's a lot of good food.
There you go.
Iowa City, good food culture.
So I would like to thank Peter, Carl, Jon, fantastic session. There's a lot to think about. I think to Peter's point, we do eat 3 times a day. We will continue to be hungry. We are a growing population, and we're going to need to figure these things out. And I think there's tremendous opportunity going forward. I think we've heard some of what's going to happen going forward. It's going to be really interesting to see what does happen. And I'm looking forward to having you all back at a non-virtual event where we can actually shake hands and then talk after the session and engage and then go have some food somewhere. Okay?
That'd be great.